Have you noticed how headlines scream economy is growing, GDP this, markets that, and yet your bank account feels like it's slowly leaking? You're not imagining it. That feeling, the weird disconnect between the economy is doing well and I still can't make ends meet, is real. And it's not a coincidence. This video is for anyone aged 20 to 35 who's working hard, scrolling headlines, and still wondering why money never seems to stretch. By the end, you'll understand the three main reasons behind the gap between official growth and personal struggle, and you'll get practical moves that actually help. Let's start with the obvious question. Why does the economy feel different from your life? When people say the economy is growing, they usually mean one big number, GDP, the total value of goods and services produced in a country. GDP tells us how big the economic pie is getting, but GDP doesn't tell us who gets which slice. For years now, economists have shown that GDP per person, the average, can rise while the typical household's income barely moves. In plain terms, the pie grows, but most of the new slices go to the top of the table. That's the first big idea. Growth does not equal evenly shared growth. You can have a booming stock market and record corporate profits, while most people see little change in their paychecks. That mismatch is the foundation of the I feel broke problem. Okay, so why aren't wages keeping up? For decades, the classic expectation was simple. When productivity goes up, when workers produce more value per hour, wages should rise too. But that link has been weakening. Since roughly the late 1970s, and especially over the last few decades, productivity kept climbing while median pay lagged behind. Economists call this the productivity pay gap. It means businesses are producing more value, but that value isn't flowing into typical workers' paychecks the way it used to. That gap matters because most people's budgets are driven by wages. If your paycheck doesn't keep pace with what things cost, you feel squeezed, even when an official economy number says things are better. Next, inflation, the sneaky thief of buying power. Inflation is the rate at which prices go up. When inflation is low and stable, wages and prices can move together. But when prices for essential stuff, housing, groceries, healthcare, climb faster than your wage, your real income falls. Real income is what your dollars actually buy after prices are counted. Official inflation measures like the Consumer Price Index track these changes. In recent years, many people reported that inflation, especially for housing and food, was their top financial worry. That's not just anecdote. Surveys from central banks show it as a dominant concern for households. A clear example, housing. Over the last few decades, house prices and rents rose far faster than wages in many places. That makes rent or mortgage the single biggest pressure on monthly budgets for young adults, starting careers or families. Data visualizations show house prices increasing dramatically relative to income, which is why a growing economy that includes booming housing markets can still leave renters and first-time buyers feeling priced out. So we have three big structural problems so far. GDP growth concentrated at the top, wages disconnected from productivity gains, and essential costs outpacing pay. But there's more. Debt and interest rates are the second structural pressure. When paychecks don't cover rising costs, people borrow. Household debt, mortgages, student loans, credit cards, auto loans has climbed to record levels in recent years. And as debt grows, more of your monthly income goes to paying interest instead of building savings. Central banks and research groups published quarterly reports showing household debt totals rising and credit card balances hitting highs. That reality, more debt, more required payments, eats your monthly cash flow and increases financial stress even during overall growth. And debt doesn't act alone. Interest rates set by central banks to fight inflation change the math. When rates go up, loan payments on adjustable debt and new mortgages can spike, which quickly tightens budgets for people with variable rate loans or those trying to refinance. So even if the economy grows, higher rates can make monthly life feel much tougher. Third, big pressure. Job quality and the new labor market. The modern job market looks different from what many of us imagine. Gig work, contract roles, and part-time schedules have expanded. That can mean flexibility, but it can also mean unstable hours, fewer benefits, and weaker bargaining power. When jobs are more insecure or pay is unpredictable, it amplifies the feeling broke effect. You might be employed and even working a ton of hours, and still not have steady, predictable income that covers your bills and future plans. Another part of this is what you earn when you're early in your career. Entry-level wages set patterns. If your first 5 years are spent in low-pay, low-benefit roles, it's hard to catch up later because housing costs, student loans, and family expenses compound. All of these combine to make age 20 to 35 a particularly pressure-filled time. But there's also a psychological side, social comparison and expectations. Social media and urban lifestyles create a constant feed of other people's highlight reels, vacations, new cars, apartment tours. That comparison makes people feel poorer relative to their peers, not just relative to their needs. Feeling broke is partly objective, your actual dollars don't stretch, and partly subjective, your standard of comparison shifts. It's important to name that because the subjective side is fixable with behavior and mindset tweaks, even if the structural side requires policy changes. Let's pause here and summarize what we've covered: 3 main causes behind the mismatch. Uneven distribution of growth. GDP grows, but the gains concentrate at the top. So typical households don't see big income increases. Wage productivity disconnect and inflation. Wages haven't always tracked productivity. And price increases for essentials erode buying power. Debt rates and job quality. Rising household debt and less stable work amplify monthly pressure, while interest rates influence how painful that debt is. If you're thinking, that sounds depressing, is there anything I can do? The answer is yes. While some forces need big policy fixes, there are practical moves you can make right now to feel financially more sane and build real buffer. Here are concrete steps, the part of the video where you get tools, not just diagnosis. First, understand your real income, not just what comes in, but what stays after inflation and essential costs. Track where your money goes for 2 months without judgment. Use that as baseline truth. Once you know how much is going to rent, food, transport, and debt, you'll spot 1 or 2 places to free up cash fast. Second, attack high-interest debt. Credit cards and variable-rate debt are budget killers. If you have high-interest balances, prioritize paying those down. Consider consolidating to a lower-rate loan only if the math works, and fees don't cancel the benefit. Third, make housing decisions strategically. Housing is usually your biggest budget line. If rent is crushing you, consider creative options, roommate shifts, moving a little farther for cheaper rent, or negotiating lease terms if markets are soft. If buying is a goal, be wary of stretching to the absolute max. High housing payments leave you vulnerable to rate hikes or job changes. Remember, affordability matters more than status. Fourth, boost earnings in ways that fit you. That could be asking for a raise with data. Switching jobs strategically, one well-timed job change can beat years of incremental raises. Or developing a freelance side income that targets a market need. The labor market rewards specialized, demonstrable skills. Invest time in concrete upskilling that translates to higher pay, short, high-impact courses, certifications, or project experience. Fifth, protect the downside. Build an emergency buffer that covers at least 1 to 3 months of living expenses. It's not glamorous, but an emergency fund is the fastest way to stop feeling like every surprise will ruin you. If saving feels impossible, start tiny and automate it. Even a small, consistent habit compounds. Sixth, invest and use time to your advantage. If you have any spare money after essentials and debt reduction, use compound interest, index funds, retirement accounts with employer matches, and low-cost diversified investments are tools that, over decades, grow much faster than small one-off bets. Seventh, policies and voting. This one's less about immediate cash and more about long-term structural change. Policies around minimum wage, affordable housing, student loans, healthcare, and tax fairness change the rules of the game. Getting informed and voting, or supporting community advocacy, influences those larger forces. Let's zoom out for a minute and hit some myths. Myth 1. If the economy is growing, everyone should feel richer. Not true. Growth can be highly unequal. Think of GDP as the total cake. The cake can grow while the way it's sliced changes. That's exactly what economists and data show. Averages can mask the distribution. Myth 2. If I just work harder, I'll catch up. Hard work helps, but it's not a guaranteed path. Work quality, bargaining power, job market structure, and luck matter a lot. Smart work, learning in-demand skills, strategic job moves, negotiating pay beats blind hard work. Myth 3. Inflation is just temporary, so I should wait. Inflation can be temporary, but its effects on housing, debt, and long-term contracts can be lasting. Treat price increases seriously in your planning. Renegotiate recurring bills where possible, lock in good interest rates when you can, and avoid letting inflation erode wages unchallenged. Now, a few quick practical scripts you can use this week if you want to raise, schedule a meeting. Prepare 2 things, a concise list of measurable accomplishments, and market salary data for your role, and ask for a specific % increase or title scope change. Employers respond better to specifics. If your credit card interest is killing you, call your issuer and ask for a lower rate. Many banks will reduce rates for good customers. If they don't, shop for a balance transfer or a consolidation loan, but always check fees and the interest-free period. If rent is too high, negotiate. Landlords prefer stable tenants. Offer a longer lease or agree to handle small maintenance in exchange for a small rent reduction. If you can move, model the true cost including commute and quality of life. Sometimes, a slightly longer commute with cheaper housing is a net win. One more important angle, mental health and money stress. Feeling broke all the time raises anxiety and drains focus. Financial stress is real and affects relationships, sleep, work, and creativity. So while you do structural work skills, debt, savings, make time for low-cost, stress relief that protects your energy. Exercise, sleep, social support, and small wins like tracking one expense and reducing it. Finally, what to watch next on the big picture and why it matters to you. Keep an eye on 3 macro signals: wage growth versus inflation, housing affordability in your local area, and household debt trends. Central bank reports and household surveys from reliable institutions summarize these trends and will influence hiring, rates, and policy debates. In short, those big numbers you read about do matter, but only when you translate them into how they affect rents, loan payments, and job prospects in your city. To wrap up, the feeling of being broke while the economy grows isn't a personal failure. It's the result of structural gaps, unequal distribution of growth, a shaky link between productivity and pay. Rising essential costs like housing and heavy household debt, those are big forces, but you can take control over many smaller levers. Track your money, reduce high-interest debt, protect your downside, grow marketable skills, and make housing choices that actually fit your budget. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this: don't measure your life only against GDP or your friends' highlight reels. Measure it by whether your monthly money supports your goals. That's the practical definition of financial health. You've been paying attention, now act on one small change this week. Make a list of 3 expenses you can trim or 1 step to increase your income. Once you start shifting the small gears, the machine of your finances starts moving in your favor.